Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson with Caleb Longa. Today we are going to look at the pathophysiology of bacterial meningitis, also known as pyrogenic meningitis or sepsis meningitis, or septic meningitis. So firstly, let's define what this pyrogenic or bacterial meningitis is. So the simple definition that we can come up with is pyrogenic meningitis. This is a life-threatening infection of the meninges that is caused by bacteria characterized by neck stiffness, fever, and headache. So that is just a simple definition that we can come up with. So what we have to understand before we look at the pathophysiology is that this meningitis is a very serious condition and it affects the meninges. So how does this bacteria or any other infection move from the blood and goes to infect the meninges? So that is basically what we are going to look at and try to find out what will happen once this bacteria enters the meninges and goes into the brain. So without wasting much of our time, let's look at the pathophysiology. So the first thing that we have to talk about is that once the causative organism enters the bloodstream, it crosses the blood-brain barrier and proliferates into the cerebrospinal fluid. So we understand that once this infection, which was in the blood, enters or crosses the blood-brain barrier, it will go into the CSF, which is the cerebrospinal fluid. So before the brain, or just on the edges of the brain, there is what we call the blood-brain barrier, and this separates the bloodstream from the brain. So in order for this infection to infect the meninges, it has to cross this barrier. Not all infections can actually cross this barrier and affect the brain. So in meningitis, the infections will cross the blood-brain barrier. So once this infection has crossed the blood-brain barrier, the host human the host immune system, which is the human immune system, will respond by stimulating inflammation of the subarachnoid and the pia mater. So once this infection goes into the meninges, it infects the meninges, the host's immune system will produce or will stimulate the inflammation of the subarachnoid and the pia mater. The bacterial meningitis predominantly involves the arachnoid and the subarachnoid space. So we are simply saying that specifically the bacterial meningitis will affect the arachnoid and the subarachnoid space. We move on. The infection spreads throughout the subarachnoid via the cerebrospinal fluid around the brain and the spinal cord, and usually involves the ventricles. So remember we said that the infection has crossed the blood-brain barrier. It has entered the cerebrospinal fluid. So once it enters the cerebrospinal fluid, as it is going up to the meninges, we are saying that the immune system of the host will produce the inflammation of the subarachnoid and the pia mater. So once this infection is settled there, it has infected these meninges, it is going to spread through the subarachnoid space, which is just below the subarachnoid, the arachnoid, and then it will spread throughout or around the brain and the spinal cord, and it will also involve the ventricles. So meningitis appears to occur as an extension of a variety of bacterial infections, probably as a result of lack of resistance to the various causative organisms. So we are simply saying that this type of meningitis, which is bacterial meningitis, and by the way, is the most common type of meningitis. It occurs in over 80% of the cases. So it is caused by various forms of bacteria. The most common route of infection is vascular dissemination from a focus somewhere. So we are simply saying that this infection, bacterial infection that may affect the brain, may be caused by vascular dissemination, so movement of this infection through the blood, and this infection may have taken place somewhere else. For example, this person may have a respiratory tract infection. So this infection is found where? In the respiratory tract. But once this infection finds its way into the bloodstream, it can easily move. It can easily move and go into the cerebrospinal fluid. That's what we mean by vascular dissemination. Or it may also enter by direct implantation after penetrating wounds, um, um, skull fractures, lumbar puncture, or surgical procedures, or any other abnormalities such as spinal bifida or foreign bodies. So what we are simply saying here is that this entrance of the bacteria can also be directly implanted, meaning, for example, when this person has a penetrating wound through the skull or through the spine, they can actually introduce the bacteria, or through skull fractures when someone has fractured their skull, or through lumbar puncture when, or if the aseptic techniques have not been put in place. Lumbar puncture, they are puncturing or they are entering through the lumbar region there in the spine. So they can be an introduction of infection, or even through surgical procedures or anatomical abnormalities such as spinal bifida. So under spinal bifida, you find that there's an exposure of the spinal cord because of the abnormality that is there, or foreign bodies such as ventricular shunt, as we find those things in hydrocephalus. So you find that there is a vascular shunt that is trying to drain away the the cerebrospinal fluid, and if that one is contaminated or has infections, it can actually cause infections being implanted in the brain. So now that we've known how the infection can actually go into the brain or into the CSF, so once implanted, the organism spreads to the cerebrospinal fluid, which serves as a conduit for spread of infection throughout the subarachnoid space. So once the infection is implanted in the CSF, it will now spread to all parts of the brain throughout the brain. So from there, we are saying that the infective process is that seen in any bacterial infection. So the way the infection is the same one, the same infective process that we see in the bacterial infections. So the first thing that will happen is inflammation. So after inflammation, what will happen is exudation. meaning production or release of fluids, increase in fluids. And then there will also be white blood cells accumulation. So there will be an increase in the white blood cells because of the immune response. The immune system is trying to respond and fight against the infection. And number three, there can be varying degree of tissue damage. So because of the inflammation, because of the exudation, and all these other things, you find that there will be tissue necrosis. Tissues will die because of these inflammatory processes. Then from there, we are furthermore saying that the purulent exudate is produced. Okay, so the pus is produced, and the infection and the inflammation and infection spreads quickly through the cerebrospinal fluid that circulates around the brain and the spinal cord. So because of the inflammation, there will be production. Because of the bacterial infection, there will be what we are calling a pus exudate, which is called purulent exudate. So once this pus is produced, together with the inflammation, the infection will quickly be spread throughout the brain and the spinal cord. So after this infection, inflammation and the pus has been spread throughout the brain and the spinal cord, the brain will become hyperemic. The brain will become hyperemic, meaning there will be an increase in the production of, there will be an accumulation or an increase in the amount of blood found in the tissue. So the blood that will be found in the brain tissue will increase. Why? Because of inflammation, because of exudation. We are also saying that there will also be pus that is formed there. So there will be a lot of fluids in the brain. Then from there, we're saying there will also be edema. The brain tissue will become edematized. There will be edema. Why? Because of the same inflammation that we are talking about. And the entire surface of the brain is covered with a layer of purulent exudates. So what we are saying here is that the brain will become hyperemic, meaning there will be a lot of fluid that will be found in the brain. There will be edema. And then we're also saying that the entire surface of the brain will be covered with a layer of pus. Remember, there is pus formation because of the bacterial infection. Then furthermore, we're saying infection extends to the ventricles, thick pus, fibrin, and adhesions may occlude the narrow passage, obstructing the flow of the cerebrospinal fluid, hence increasing intracranial pressure. So when the infection has continued, as the infection continues to spread in the ventricles, there will be furthermore production of pus, which of course will be thicker. And this will result in the occlusion of the narrow passage. So because of the infection in the ventricles, which will cause inflammation, which will cause thick pus formation, and which will also cause adhesions, these will narrow the passage where this cerebrospinal fluid will flow. So because the passage is being narrowed, there will be obstruction of the cerebrospinal fluid, and this will result in the increase in the intracranial pressure. So remember, the brain tissue is being inflamed, the passage is being narrowed because of the pus and the inflammation. Therefore, the cerebrospinal fluid will not have anywhere to drain from. The drainage will be closed or clogged. Therefore, there will be an increase in the intracranial pressure. So once the cerebrospinal fluid is obstructed from going out or from draining out of the body, out of the brain, there will be an increase in the intracranial pressure. Then lastly, we can say hydrocephalus may result when the exudates block the small passages between the ventricles. So this hydrocephalus will also come in. Why? Because there will be blockage of these small passages in the ventricles. So once these small passages in the ventricles are blocked, it means that the cerebrospinal fluid will not have anywhere to go. So what will happen is that it will start accumulating in the brain. And because of that accumulation, there will be a condition that we call hydrocephalus. And as we know it, this is where the skull or the brain, the head will start extending because of the increase in the cerebrospinal fluid. Then lastly, the last point we can say, the inflammatory process leads to fever, meningeal irritation leading to neck stiffness, increased intracranial pressure leading to severe headache. So those are just some of the signs and symptoms that may result due to the inflammatory process or due to the whole condition. So we're saying there will be fever, there will be neck stiffness, and there will be severe headache. So those are some of the signs and symptoms, and this is the simple pathophysiology for pyrogenic meningitis. So it is very simple and straightforward. Let's follow it the way it is. So in the next video that will come out soon, we are going to learn about the nursing care plan of pyrogenic meningitis. So we're going to do nursing care plan for a patient with pyrogenic meningitis. Okay, we have come to the end of our lesson. If you have any questions, you can leave in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe and share the video. Thank you. See you next time.